The American Revolution began with the shots heard around the world at the battles of Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775. How did this battle take place? What were the tactics used by the colonials and the British? How did the colonial militia and Minutemen win their first battles of the American Revolution? For answers to these questions and more Army History Insights, stay tuned.
Welcome to the U.S. Army History and Heritage Podcast, the official podcast of the United States Army's Center of Military History. The Center of Military History writes and publishes the Army's official history, manages the U.S. Army Museum Enterprise, and provides historical support throughout the U.S. Army.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the United States Army History and Heritage Podcast. I'm Lee Reynolds, the Strategic Communications Officer for the Center of Military History. In this episode, we're discussing the opening battles of the American Revolution at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. Joining me for this discussion is Army historian Captain Jonathan Bratton. Welcome, Captain Bratton.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a great honor to be on the Army History Podcast.
Yes, well, thank you. And I know you have a lot of background in this area, as we're going to talk about here in a second. But I'm looking forward to our discussion today. So before we get into that, just a little background on Captain Bratton. So Captain Bratton is a command historian for the Maine Army National Guard and is assigned as the National Guard Bureau's Revolutionary War 250 liaison to the Center of Military History. He holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in history, has served 2 company command tours, and served as an instructor in the Department of History for the United States Military Academy at West Point from 2021 to 2022. He is a combat veteran of Afghanistan and worked as a historical on-screen advisor for the Smithsonian Channel documentary, Americans Underground, Secrets of World War I. That sounds fascinating. He has published articles in Army History magazine, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, and contributed chapters to several historical anthologies. In 2020, he published To the Last Man, a National Guard Regiment in the Great War, 1917 to 1919, for which he received the 2020 Army Historical Foundation's Distinguished Writing Award. Captain Bratton has also contributed to the CMH Revolutionary War pamphlet series as a writer and managing editor. So, a lot of great work there, a lot of experience. But what I want to talk to you about before we get into the questions here is this pamphlet series that you're editing for CMH. So can you just give us an overview of what that series is about?
Sure, absolutely. The way we look at it holistically is that we want to try to lay out the experience of the U.S. Army, so the Continental Army. So we're really focusing on the main campaigns of the Continental Army throughout the whole span of the war, throughout all 8 years. Of course, we have to put that into perspective, and so there's a whole strategic overview of how we got into this spot. And the first of the works, which I co-authored, Opening Shots, really goes into that background, looking at the causes of the war. How did we get here? And then at how the Continental Army is built. And so the series takes you through the major campaigns of the American Revolution, really focusing on the Army's actions, but also trying to get down as much as possible to the soldier view, to those soldier-level motivations, looking at who's serving, how that service is reflective of society, and then looking at the consequences, the analysis of all this, not just the tactical aspect, but the operational and strategic, and what does this mean, especially with the last of the monograph, Securing Victory. What does this mean for the nation that we became? So really, it's pitched towards not just a military history audience. We've got great editors here at the center who correct us from all of our jargon and they're like, wait, what does this mean? And so we're trying to make these available and accessible to the average American public, whether they're military or not. So it's really geared towards everyone.
Yeah, I call them a pamphlet series. I think the historian community calls them monographs. So they're the same, but they're short, and they're actually fun to read. They're about, 60 to 80 pages on average?
You're looking around 80 pages. So yeah, this is where we all get into the pedantic arguments that historians love to have of, is this a pamphlet or a monograph? You know, I'm not sure at what stage a pamphlet becomes a monograph. It's like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. I have no idea. But I do know, I mean, at 80 pages, these are, it's a lot. And we're asking our authors to pack a lot into 80 pages, which is very difficult for people who love their subject, right? Yeah. Because they want to go in depth. You want to tell every story. You want to give all the context. And yet...
but they're not academic reads.
They're not, no.
I don't want to mislead the public here. They're fun reads, and there are a lot of pictures and a lot of great maps.
Incredible maps. Matt Bowen, massive shout out to Matt Bowen, the center's cartographer, for the incredible work that he's done, both creating brand new maps for each of our authors, or redoing old maps to show a new perspective or a new story. Really just incredible work that he's done throughout this whole process.
And our discussion today is going to be, is really covered in the first pamphlet, Opening Shots, that you co-wrote as well as edited.
Yes, so everyone can skip this podcast and read. No, I'm just kidding. But
don't do that.
pick up Opening Shots. But we'll try to add a little bit more. That was one of the biggest problems of in 80 pages telling the story of how we got into this situation, and then everything that happens at Lexington and Concord and the birth of the United States Army, and trying to push all this into 80 pages and make it readable.
And then people can access these, can see them. They can go to our website under publications, and they can read them as free PDF downloads, or they can order them, and there's ordering instructions on how they can purchase them from there. All right, well, great. Well, let's now pivot over back to the battles of Lexington and Concord. So by April of 1775, we know that tensions were very high between the colonists and the British due to lingering taxes and the intolerable acts, which left Boston and all of Massachusetts basically in a state of martial law. So can you pick up from there, describe a little bit about the strategic and the tactical setting, and address the opposing forces? Who was in charge? What did those forces look like?
Sure. So... And this is always one of those things of, as a historian, you're like, all right, well, I'm going to start at this point, and then your brain, you go, oh, no, I need to go back to that thing, and then it's like 10 years back, and then all of a sudden you're in talking about a thing in the 1740s, and you've lost everyone.
Yeah, let's not go back that far.
So I'm just going to take you back to October 1774. I feel like that's reasonable.
Yeah, and we did cover that in the last podcast, so just a quick overview in case someone wasn't listening.
So October 1774, the biggest thing that happens is that... Lieutenant General Thomas Gage, who is the British commander in North America, is given orders to essentially dissolve the assembly for Massachusetts, so to take away their self-governance. And in doing so, the Massachusetts Assembly, being contrarian as always, just decides to go meet in Concord, as the case was at the time. Met in Concord.
And where is?
Yeah, that's a great question. Concord is about 20 miles to the west. It is the shire town for Middlesex County. Massachusetts is very county-oriented and has very, very strong county and town governments at this time, and has probably out of all the American colonies, the British colonies in America, of which there are about 32, we have to remember, that a whole bunch of them do not rebel. Has the strongest experience of self-government. And by that I mean that local average individuals will find themselves making decisions that impact their neighbors, whether you're a town selectman, whether you're a county representative. And this is new, dangerous world that we're in of these people thinking for themselves. So with this long tradition of self-governance, the assembly just says, okay, whatever, Gage, you dissolved us, and so we're going to adjourn from Salem to Concord, and we're going to set ourselves up as basically a shadow government, and they take over running governance, all the taxes, transportation, trade, all of that. Of course, trade is a big one because the British have shut down the port of Boston, thereby making it very difficult to make a livelihood. So you have a whole bunch of people who are unemployed, a lot of young military-age males who don't have a lot of prospects. And the Massachusetts Assembly, now the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, reorganizes the Massachusetts militia. And all of this to say is that you have a large pool of manpower that is available and that is motivated. Right. Both politically, there's a lot of religious backgrounds, Congregationalist religion, providing this idea of, you can have a direct individual relationship with God, again, pushing this idea of an individualism. So the Provincial Congress reorganizes the militia, and what that means is they essentially do a sweep of leadership. So most militia units, the officers were either elected or they were appointed by the assembly or the governor. Of course, right now there's no governor. Well, there is a governor, but no one's listening to him.
You're right.
And so the
who's leading the shadow government right now?
So you have the shadow government is essentially led by all the assemblymen of it's the same individuals. They all just they kept their same job. They just changed the name and changed the place where they're meeting.
I think John Hancock.
John Hancock
Adams
will eventually become a president of the Continental Congress, and he would like to say that he has a very elevated role in Massachusetts politics. John and Sam Adams would beg to differ. And Joseph Warren is also a prominent political / military / social personality in this time, as you have this overlapping of the Sons of Liberty, this almost I don't want to call it a paramilitary organization because they don't really do military things, but they can do intimidation or
they were more of a political arm than they were a military arm.
Much more so, yeah. Okay. So the Provincial Congress, what they do is they can't really mandate a lot. They do a lot of encouraging, but with the encouraging, they say, look, we have a strong history of militia tradition, and we need to be able to defend ourselves in case all of the omens are pointing towards this is not going to end well. And so with the reform of the militia, they get rid of a lot of the loyalist leaders or people who just held those positions because it was a social position. Oh, I'm a colonel of such and such a regiment because everyone likes me because I buy them drinks at the militia muster. And so by and large, they replace those leaders with tried and true combat veterans from the French and Indian Wars. So you've got, going back to the 1740s, for a lot of these individuals in their lifetimes, a massive amount of experience in Britain's colonial wars in North America. 20,000 people alone from Massachusetts served during the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, from 1754 to 1763. That's a lot of people just from one colony. And their service ranged from doing logistics, doing transportation, to scouting, to security operations, to base operations. So you got a lot of people who have various skill levels from combat to logistics. And they're the ones who are taking mostly company and regimental leadership positions.
And then how many people were in the militia that if they needed to respond, how many could they call up?
So Gage's adjutant actually in the spring of 1775 gives him a running estimate, and he says, hey, the New England could probably muster an army of about 30,000 without too much of a problem. And in fact, Massachusetts is able to fill about 20,000 troops.
That's just Massachusetts.
And that's just Massachusetts. Yeah. Wow. And again, Massachusetts is a bit of an anomaly. They've had a very long, very regimented tradition of militia service going all the way back to the 17th century, the early mid-1600s. So it's a little bit different than a lot of the other colonies. This is an ingrained thing. It's a family tradition. There's a lot of history of military service that they can take pride in. And one of the big reforms that they look at is going back to this old militia idea of, they were actually originally called the snowshoe men or there were alert units. And these were supposed to be highly trained and ready individuals who could be available at a moment's notice. In common parlance, have a higher standard of readiness.
Right.
Whatever that means. But the whole concept was essentially creating as these regiments were reformed, 1/4 of each regiment would become Minutemen. As they were called, would be formed into minute companies of 50 soldiers each.
Quick reaction forces, if you would.
Very quick reaction force, but also think of it almost as your 82nd Airborne. Highly trained, highly ready, and available at a moment's notice.
Okay. And when did that concept develop?
So this is in October of 1774. This is when this is initiated. So by February of 1775, February and March, you've had a fall and winter for these companies to establish. And so companies of 50 men each, they elect their own officers, and they're usually electing the most competent and capable amongst them. They're grouped into minute battalions, and then the officers elect their own field grades. So this is very much a merit-based, everyone's looking around going like, all right, who do I want in charge if things go bad? Right. Because there are indications that things will go bad. Britain's been building up its military power in Boston, in North America, since the 1760s. And they've gradually watched various rights get stripped away, and to the point now where everyone's wondering what comes next out of this. And so you have this growing force of militia regiments and minute battalions. Massachusetts appoints 6 general officers. No one really knows what they're supposed to do, what these 6 GOs in this provincial army are going to do, but they've got them because they're beginning to have build a sort of tentative plan. They build committees of supply as well to think about how do we sustain this army as they're beginning to amass.
So
provisions.
Let's talk about that for a second. The supplies. So I'm assuming it's rations, food. It's weapons, ammunition, cannon, gunpowder, and where were they putting all this stuff?
So if you think about what you need for an army to literally survive before it can even fight, you got to think about, all right, where are soldiers going to live? Well, we have to get tents. How are we going to defend ourselves? Oh, well, we have to have entrenching tools to be able to, dig fortifications. How are we going to carry this stuff around? We need wagons. How are we going to feed everyone? All right, well, we got to get supplies of flour, of grains, to feed forage, to feed animals. This long list before you even get to gunpowder, lead, and ordnance. And so this is what they're amassing. They're also thinking about medical supplies as well. Trying to amass as many medical chests as possible.
And this shows the experience from those combat veterans.
Absolutely. They're thinking these are the ones who, during the 7 Years' War, the British really looked, especially once Prime Minister, when Pitt becomes Prime Minister, he basically said, hey, American colonies, here's a blank check. Wow. Do whatever you need to fight this war. And so they become the logisticians of the British Army. So they understand what it means to build and move an army. And so that's what's going into their planning. And yes, powder is a big one. So immediately the flashpoint, powder becomes the flashpoint. And the British are very aware of this. Gage is no dummy. He's got about 6,000 or 7,000 troops now in and around Boston.
6,000 or 7,000 troops against a potential 20,000 to 30,000.
But remember, these are regulars.
Yeah.
Gage at one point calls the Massachusetts militia sort of a mob of farmers, so to speak. Okay. Although he also does, in a very prescient statement prior to Lexington and Concord, he writes in one of his reports, the most probable form of injury that they will do to us is what they will fight in the bush, as it was called, they will take examples from the last war and they will attempt to ambush us, and he's not dumb. Gage also has experience leading troops in this war, in the last war. He's been in North America since then. He married a woman from New Jersey. So he's very sympathetic in many ways to the American cause, but he has also got the crown. He's got Parliament and George III sort of breathing down his neck saying, hey, this colony is in rebellion. You need to do something about it.
Which brings me to the next point. What actions was he taking? He knew they were doing all this. They were stashing supplies throughout the colony. And so what was he going to do?
Exactly. He's not dumb. He has agents and scouts around that are saying, hey, in such and such a town, we've heard there's this many supplies hidden. People are hiding things in their barns. They're hiding them in their homes. They're hiding them in the stores. They're burying things in their garden. It's all very detailed too. Colonel James Barrett, who commands the militia regiment in Concord, who we'll hear about later, he has a very detailed list and a map of all the things that are buried sort of in his area of operations, including on his farm. Just of like, all right, here's where I put this thing. I shouldn't forget these 5 cannon. I might need them. And so Gage is aware of this, and he's also aware of how tenuous the peace is. And so he's trying to thread a very fine line. So what he does, he has 2 main missions. One, encourage or discourage rather the locals from rebellion. So how do you do that? Well, you do presence patrols. You get your troops out there. You show them the power and the discipline and the force of the British Army. And in doing so, at the same time, he is accomplishing his second objective, which is training them, because his troops a bunch of them came across in the summer of 1774. That's a long ocean voyage. They're, I don't want to call it fat and happy. They're mostly just unhappy and sort of disgruntled and not fed well. But they need to be they need to be whipped into shape. So through the spring of 1775, he begins sending them out on toughening marches. This puts them out there. It shows the uniform, and it's an attempt to show the power and might of Great Britain.
How far would they go out of Boston?
They don't go out as far as Concord, but they are getting 10, 15 miles outside of town. And it's important to note this. It's important to note that people were used to seeing, by this time, columns of British troops marching around. So it's not like, with the April 19th expedition, it's not like this is a new thing. And in fact, multiple times, Gage has sent columns out to secure powder.
Okay.
The most recent and sort of almost the one that almost sets things off is actually at Salem, the Salem powder alarm, where the regulars marched to Salem to basically seize powder that the Massachusetts militia have taken from various British storehouses. There's raids going all up and down the East Coast of in various colonies. Portsmouth, New Hampshire militia raid one of the defenses there to seize powder. Powder is like the big commodity. And there's a standoff outside Salem between militia and citizens and British regulars. And there's sort of a feeling that on both sides that, you know what, it's time. It's time to throw down. We've reached a point where conversation isn't working anymore. It's a bunch of the city so the town selectmen for Salem come out, some of the militia leaders, and they negotiate sort of with the British commander of, hey, what steps can you take for you to save face? And not, and us to save face as well. So everything ends peacefully. The British write it up as a success. We went in there, we cowed them. They thought that they were going to stop us from marching into the town, but we were able to we crossed that bridge, and because it was literally a bridge that they had to, it was a drawbridge that went up and down. We crossed the bridge. We showed them, and then the Americans said, no, we showed them. We showed that we have the power to prevent them from searching and seizing property. So this is sort of the most recent one.
So did the British and the militia actually face off?
It is a glaring contest, yeah.
But they allowed them to come in and take the powder.
No,
they didn't.
There was no powder. They allowed them to essentially march through town, look around a few places. They didn't seize anything. So so much of this is about political viewpoints or I guess I'd say court of public opinion. So what are people seeing and how is that influencing the way they think? And so this is what Gage is trying to do to sort of thread this very fine line, which all comes to all comes for naught because on April 13th, 14th, he finally gets a message that had been sent from the king and Parliament the previous month. It's that great thing of ocean crossing. Hey, it could take 3 weeks, could take 6 months. You never know.
And what was this message?
And the message is essentially, hey, His Majesty the King has placed the colony of Massachusetts in rebellion. You need to use military force to solve this political problem that you've put us in, essentially. And so you've got poor Thomas Gage there who's sitting like, God, what do I... I don't have an army of 20,000, 30,000 troops. So if you look at Gage's decision-making, when I said his adjutant had made that estimate of, hey, they can field an army of 30,000, he was sort of like, okay, I can deal with that. But if they get artillery, then it's a massive problem. Then they go from, sort of rabble in arms to a field army. And not only that, if they can get artillery up onto the high points around Boston to threaten the Royal Navy, which is his lifeline. If you think you've got Boston is connected to Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is a Royal Navy, a growing Royal Navy dockyard. It will expand massively in the next 20 to 30 years, and then to England. That's his lifeline. If that disappears, he can no longer sustain himself. So his immediate point it never becomes small arms. He's like, I can't control that. Everyone around here has a fowling piece or a musket.
So is that why Concord became his first target?
So Concord becomes his first target because he has intelligence that there's a number of artillery pieces, both field guns and mortars, that are hidden at Concord. And so that becomes, he wants to make a quick, bold stroke, seize this, show the futility of attempting, showing, hey, not only do I know where all your stuff is, I can take it.
Okay.
And that's the statement that he's trying to make.
So describe the operation. What was Gage's plan? How did it start? We all know about the alerts, right, from the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere and others. So were the colonials waiting, anticipating this? Did they know where Gage was going to go on the 19th?
So it's hard to keep a secret in Boston. That I think
to this day.
Gage was aware of it. He probably should have been a little bit more aware of it. But so he gets this order on the 14th, and the next day, on the 15th and 16th, he starts putting together his plan. He establishes a strike force, which is essentially all of the flank companies of his regiments. So that would be the light infantry company. They tend to be younger, more agile, a little bit more intelligent, able to think on their own individuals who are in the light companies, and they fight. They're trained to fight, in the wilderness. They fight as individuals. They move from cover to cover, and they're meant to protect your flanks as you're moving along. And then also the grenadier companies. They're your big, tall, burly guys who they really just want to fight things. And they look impressive. They give them a tall hat, so they look even more intimidating. So he has his grenadier companies and his light companies, forms up in a task force under the command of one of his regimental commanders, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, with Major John Pitcairn of the Marines as his second in command. Cool, looks good on paper, like, oh, wow, yeah, all your like elite troops and, hard charging Marine made. Well, here's a problem. We talk in the U.S. Army about unity of command being so important, and that if you are going to fight together, hopefully you train together. Mm-hmm. It's one of our sort of tenets is that, any time you're doing a joint or combined operation, you have a number of control measures meant to mitigate all the problems that come from different services or different units or what have you. All these control measures. Well, none of these are in place. None of these units have ever worked together. The light infantry have trained together. That's about it. They're very unfamiliar with their chains of command. They don't have their normal chains of command. Again, if you think about like what happens in a crisis, you're always looking like over your shoulder, like, oh, who's that other person they're gone. Wait, who's my boss now? So that doesn't exist. There is no unity of command. In addition, the way the orders go out in Boston, it's haphazard. I mean, Pitcairn doesn't even know that he's been chosen as the XO for this operation because the orderly from Gage leaves his orders on his bed, doesn't even try to go find him. Wow. And Pitcairn sort of finds out at the last moment. It's just an indication of how haphazard this is. And of course, soldiers talk. So it could be someone playing dice in a tavern saying, "Oh, yep, sorry, I owe you money. I lost some money here, but I'll be back in 2 days. Don't worry, it'll be almost exactly 2 days.
I'll be in Concord tomorrow. Yeah.
I just got to be out of town for a bit, but I'll be right back." And everyone's listening, and you've got tons of Sons of Liberty members and sympathizers in Boston, and they're feeding this to this very active network of intelligence. So that includes Paul Revere, it includes Samuel Dawes, and you get the main Massachusetts Committee of Safety concern is, where are they going? So if a force comes out of Boston, where are they going to go? And they'd set up a plan previously to indicate where British troops are land, because they're thinking, all right, if they march out on the land side, or if they get ferried over the water, it could indicate different targets that they might have. Of course, Concord, it was considered one of the big ones. The Provincial Congress had met there. There's a bunch of stuff stored there. So again, it's not like no one was thinking of this thing. Everyone was seeing these possibilities. So the alert system that they come up with is that the famous story of the two lanterns in North Church, and that if there's one lantern, that means that the troops after they're assembled are marching out via Boston Neck, which means that there's probably a target somewhere towards the south. If they take boats over to Charlestown or Lechmere Point near Cambridge, then they're probably striking somewhere towards the interior, somewhere towards Concord. Oh, okay. So when you have the two lanterns shining, two if by sea, one if by land, two if by sea, not really sea, it's really more like by river or bay. That is the tripwire that sets off not only Revere, but a whole bunch of other alert riders who are riding through the colony saying the regulars are out, and then that's being carried, that's being sent, relayed by other signals, bonfires, firing a musket. The bells of various towns would begin to peal to summon the militia.
And at what time on the 18th did the British launch their movement?
So it takes a while, as with every plan, right? You think it's, all right, we're going to do this, and someone's like, I forgot my gloves. Got to go run back and get those.
Yeah, they always say the best plan is null and void as soon as
doesn't survive first contact. This one doesn't even survive just getting out of Boston. Yeah. So it takes them a while to assemble from their barracks. It takes a while to find all the officers, and they cross over. The Royal Navy ferries them across. It takes 2 lifts. They've got a whole bunch of soldiers waiting there with wet feet. And finally, around 1 a.m, about 650 to 700 British troops under the command of Colonel Smith begin marching into the countryside. Now, Gage's orders have been very specific on some parts and very vague in others. Where he's specific, he gives insanely detailed instructions of what to do with everything you find. I mean, he's like, take the musket balls and throw them into streams, and throw flour in there, knock bits of the cannons off, burn these things. There's nothing about, hey, what happens if someone opposes you? Right. So these are his written orders. We don't know what the verbal orders were. But this is what Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, who is a fairly very steady officer, not very imaginative, is thinking as he marches into the Massachusetts countryside. And remember, this is, it's nighttime. They're hearing bells. They're seeing fires. They're hearing random musket shots. And everyone's imagination just goes from like 0 to 150.
Wow. So what is the militia doing at this point? Militia and the Minutemen.
So at this point, you have the alarm. The alarm system has set off, and the riders are moving north, south, and west. And into the west, you have Paul Revere and Samuel Dawes. They meet up with William Prescott, and they begin alerting the towns from Lexington to Concord in Middlesex County. There's riders going everywhere. Think of it as this graduating arc of alert, just sort of spreading across the towns of Massachusetts. So the militia companies are mustering usually to their town greens. They're assembling ammunition. They're getting rations, and then they're waiting to hear, what are we doing? Where are we going? Because that's the first thing. And in Lexington, which again they don't know that this is exactly where the British are heading. Right, yeah. The British are heading towards Concord.
Lexington is
on the way.
On the way to Concord. About how far from Concord are they?
It's about 5.5, 6 miles from Concord. So so British troops are to get to Concord have to march through Lexington. Take the Concord Road through Lexington, and so it's on their route of march. And there is a militia company there, commanded by a guy named John Parker, possibly a possibly a veteran of the French and Indian War. We're not quite sure. But he's elected by the town selectmen as the militia company commander because of his experience, his age, and he just has a generally very good reputation in the town. So he is alerted by his first sergeant, William Monroe, who actually runs the town tavern, who gains intelligence from one of his men who says, hey, there's a British scouting party nearby, something's going on. Monroe goes back, sends out a scouting party of his own, runs back to Lexington, tells Parker. Parker doesn't take any chances, and around midnight, he has the town bell begin to peal, calling in the militia company. So around midnight, you've got about around 100 troops assembled in Lexington with the Lexington Company, which is pretty good. Yeah. And as is usual at the time, Parker and his officers and non-commissioned officers sort of get together and go, well, what do we do? What's going on? And everyone agrees, yeah, we need to find more information. So they send out another scouting party, and Parker says, all right, everyone just, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Just stay ready, stay nearby. And so most of them adjourn to sort of local taverns and things like that. Before they do leave, they all clear their muskets. He gives them an order to fire a volley because no one's, you don't want to take a loaded musket into an inn and cause an incident there. They fire this volley, and this is actually important because around this time, Paul Revere actually gets captured by a mounted British party, and Paul Revere is just spinning a long lie.
Oh, is he? Oh.
He's like, we've got 600 troops in Lexington. You're never going to make it home. And for these British officers who've been riding around the countryside, they're wigged out already. Yeah. And now here's this guy telling them all this stuff, and they're like, I don't know if he's lying or not. And then from nearby, just about less than a mile away is Lexington, and you hear a volley, and it's Lexington Company clearing their weapons, and they're like freaked out even more. Wow. These British, most of them are majors down to second lieutenants, the scouting party. They eventually release Revere, and he runs back to Lexington to give everyone the news that, hey, there is a British column that's on the way. We need to get unrelated, but you have John Hancock and Samuel Adams in Lexington. They just happen to be there, and he goes in there to say, "Hey, you guys, and your trunk filled with papers that could incriminate everyone. You need to leave."
So, British get to Lexington, and what happens there?
So the British get to Lexington. Gage actually pushes the light infantry under Major Pitcairn ahead of the main column because he's not satisfied with the speed. He goes, we need to get people in Concord to seize the bridges to secure the town. So just go fast.
So they bypass Lexington.
Well, no, they have to go through Lexington. But again, Lexington's not on anybody's map of, hey, here's an important
thing. But when they
thing.
get there, they see about 100 militia.
When they get there, they find that there's that Parker has assembled his company on the green. Now, there's only about 74 of them. Probably about 20 were like, I'm going back to bed. So they
still
miss
at the tavern.
Miss being part of, I'm still at the tavern, miss being part of history. And Parker gets the news back that there's a British column marching into town. So he forms them up around just prior to dawn on Lexington Green. And they are perpendicular to the road to Concord. So they're not blocking it. They're standing on the green. They make the decision. They will see us, but we will not oppose them. We will not try to fight them. We are here to represent the town of Lexington as sort of law and order of just, we're watching you. You don't have to do anything. Well, what happens is you've got British troops who've been marching all night. They've been hearing gunfire. Also, their commander halted them outside of Lexington and told them to load, and not just load powder, but load ball. That's a significant moment. No one's done that one before. That's a new one. And so this has got a lot of young British troops just really keyed up. They march into town. It's dawn. You're coming into town. You're coming down the hill. You look out, and there's this mass of troops that are awaiting you on the village green. When you're all wrought up and you're 22, 75 people looks like 200. And at this point, a really critical thing happens. There's actually on the tip of Lexington Green, there's a meeting house, a place of worship. Well, the two lead companies go to the right of it, and Major Pitcairn goes to the left. And so for a very crucial 10 to 20 seconds, no one's in command. And those two companies immediately, ordered by their officers, go into the line of battle on Lexington Green, and are presenting not a they could have marched, they could have kept going. Instead, they just tunnel vision, whoop, and go right in on these troops. Adopt a belligerent attitude, fix bayonets, and present a very martial force. Pitcairn rides around, sees what's happening, tries to defuse the situation, orders Parker to lay down his weapons and disperse. Parker gives the order to his men to disperse. He doesn't give the order to lay down their weapons, but gives them order to disperse. They are in the act of falling back, leaving the green. Somebody fires a shot. Nobody knows who, but that's enough for the keyed up British to fire at first a few shots, then a volley, and then a bayonet charge. And in this, you've got 8 members of the Lexington militia who are killed or mortally wounded, and others who are wounded. This is happening on these men's homes. Jonathan Harrington, who is mortally wounded, drags himself, crawls across the street from the green to his house, and dies on his own doorstep. Oh, wow. This is under the eyes of everyone in the town. This is very public. This is not a private little thing that happens. Right. Gage, the sort of carnage continues until, Smith arrives on the scene, grabs a drummer, has him beat the ceasefire, and is like, what the HE double hockey sticks has been going on here? I leave you for 10 minutes. Get everyone under control. It takes about half an hour to get them back on the road to Concord, and then they begin marching to Concord. And everyone just goes, what just happened? How did this occur? And Parker, to his great credit as a leader, he assembles, after they take care of their dead and wounded, he forms his men back up, and then they march down the road after the British. And that's an incredible feat to have just suffered, a good 20% casualties, but not just 20% casualties, but the Lexington Militia Company is filled with multiple sets of fathers and sons, brothers, cousins, uncles and nephews. Everyone knows each other. Right. And so this was just a traumatic event that just happened in front of the families of all of these men. Oh, wow. And so this sets the stage for what is going to become a very bloody morning.
And then, so they're on the road to Concord. And what happens?
Finally on the road to Concord. Now, at this time, in Concord, you have Colonel John Barrett, who's the commander of the militia regiment there, and he's mustering his regiment. You know, the first companies to arrive are the companies of his son and his son-in-law. So again, very, very family affair, right? As around 6:30 in the morning, you've got the news that someone brings news in that there's something happened in Lexington. And everyone's asking the question, did they fire ball? Essentially, were they actually shooting ammunition, or was it just blanks? Was it what happened?
Was that common, just to shoot blanks?
It could be, yes, or to fire over the heads. You know, that was a common,
just to scare them.
A common sort of riot control practice, I guess we would call it today, because no one could believe that they were actually immediately fired into.
It hadn't happened before.
Hadn't happened. Yeah. And so, I guess, except for the Boston Massacre, but that was a very different incident. Now,
and 5 years beforehand,
right?
So
exactly.
It wasn't fresh, yeah.
So what you've got all these leaders trying to figure out what is going on. Now, the force in Concord is growing as more and more units are coming in. Barrett sends a couple units down the road to go see, hey, what's going on? And they actually meet up with the oncoming British. They about face, the militia do, and they march back down the road to Concord, followed by, it's almost like they're escorting them into town. Okay. One of the soldiers says that actually as they were marching, they got on the same drum beat.
Oh, how funny.
And he said for a moment we had very sweet music between their fifes and drums and our fifes and drums.
Oh, wow.
But this sort of nice little moment doesn't last. Barrett and his... John Buttrick, Major John Buttrick, who is the executive officer of the Minute Battalion for Concord, they make the decision, we're not going to fight, we're not going to contest the town until we know what's going on. So they pull their 5 or 6 companies that had gathered at that point back to the west, so crossing the Concord River over North Bridge, and then up onto this hill called Punkatasset Hill. It's the old traditional militia mustering ground, and they're going to wait there to see what happens and gather more strength. And Barrett also has to go, tell his wife to do something about all the cannons that are buried in the cabbage patch, So, Barrett's got to ride back. He rides back to his farm, tries to, speed more things away. And then by the time he comes back, the situation has changed dramatically. Looking down from Punkatasset Hill, he can see North Bridge, and he can see that there's 3, little blots of red down there. There's 3 British light companies that are guarding North Bridge because Gage has ordered his light companies out to guard the bridges. He has also sent 4 companies out to Barrett's farm, which Barrett had just left after, very narrowly getting a bunch of supplies out of there. There's still a few things buried in the garden that the light infantry will find, but not too much of value. But now you've got these companies down on the bridge, and then the grenadiers are searching the town, and they do a very, they've had very strict orders, to respect private property. And the colonists are not dumb, and they take advantage of that. So, a grenadier enters a house, and the colonist says, "All right, these are my peas.
Right.
These are my flour. Mm-hmm. This is not the colony's and so they go, all right, well, it's private property. We're not going to search that. So they miss the entire box of coins, the specie, the essentially pay chest of the Massachusetts militia that's hidden there. They miss a bunch of stuff, but they do find a couple artillery carriages. They find some tents. They find some wooden engineering equipment, picks and spades. So they pile all that up in the middle of the town, throw a match on it. And, as happens, sparks carry from that fire to the roof of a nearby house. And this woman comes over and she's like, hey, you let my house on fire. And the grenadier's like, oh, really sorry. And they form a bucket brigade and then begin putting it out. Yeah. So that's all really nice and, gentlemanly. But from Punkatasset Hill, where you're standing out there about 3/4 of a mile outside of town, you're sitting there arguing about what to do. Your force has amassed to about 500 troops. And all of a sudden you see smoke rising from your town. And Regimental Adjutant Joseph Hosmer, who was already known to be a rabble-rousing, contentious kind of guy, turns to his boss, to Colonel Barrett, and says, will you let them burn the town down? Which is, put your boss on the spot. So Barrett and Buttrick make the decision that they are going to not allow that to happen. Their job is to protect the town and the property and the people, and they send a column of about 250 troops down the path, the road towards Concord to Northbridge, under the overall command of Major Buttrick. And these are Minutemen companies, so they're the most highly trained and proficient and best armed. Most of them have bayonets. They've got cartridge boxes. They have the accoutrement that you would need to be sort of considered a regular fighting soldier. Down on the bridge, the British are suddenly freaked out because they thought they were confronting farmers, and all of a sudden a column of troops marching very orderly according to the drill manual, which both sides use the same drill manuals. Come marching down on them. There's no overall commander at Northbridge, and so they basically make a decision to pull back on the other side. The minute companies grow closer, the British begin to pull the planks up from the bridge. Okay. Major Buttrick yells at them to stop and urges his lead company on forward. And once again, it is not the Americans who open fire; it is the British. And at first, a ragged and then a general volley comes from the British. Captain Isaac Davis from Acton who's in the lead company, the lead company commander. He's killed immediately, as is one of his soldiers. And Buttrick says, "Fire, for God's sake, fire." And the militia begin a really deadly fire. And so this is the proverbial shot heard round the world. This forces the British light infantry to fall back to Concord. Gage suddenly realizes, oh no, this is bad, because he just had 3 companies break and run from farmers. And that gives him the impetus to, hey, we got to wrap this up. We got to get out of here because I think things have turned really, really bad.
Was it at that point that they started to head back to Boston?
This is the point where they load their wounded up onto wagons and head that back to Boston. And it is a running battle.
Okay, I was going to say, what was that walk like?
So Gage unwittingly had marched into within the 20-mile radius, so the marching distance for that area. There's 14,000 troops in 47 different regiments. Wow. And they're all concentrating. And now the word's gotten out that, yes, there was firing. Yes, they started it. Yes, they killed people. And so what's going to happen is that companies are going to fight as companies, or sometimes from Woburn, their whole battalion goes into action together. And they're going to hit the British column as it makes its way down the road towards Lexington, and then from Lexington to Boston.
Basically a 20-mile running battle then.
It is, you hear the Mogadishu Mile. This is the
it's a long way.
Boston 20 mile.
And these British troops had been up for a long time.
All night.
And now
it's a hot
fighting.
April day. April 19th turns out to be a very warm day, up into the 70s and 80s. And they're hit as soon as they leave Concord, they're hit a spot called Merriam's Corner. And then that battle that just begins this running battle from points of from Bloody Angle, fighting through Lincoln all the way back to Lexington. They're hit in an ambush by John Parker, who gets his revenge, firing from a bluff. Fire from his men wounds Colonel Smith, and the entire British column actually disintegrates and flees back into Lexington. Would have been entirely destroyed had it not been for British reinforcements under Lord Hugh Percy, around 1,200 troops who come out and hold Lexington, give Smith's men time to rally. Okay. And now the combined British task force begins to go back. And then the most savage fighting of the day happens in a town called Menotomy, modern-day Arlington, where it's at this point the British are burning houses because they've been receiving fire from houses, so they burn houses. So
the gentlemanly conduct is no longer there.
Gone. It's all gone. It's all gone. And it's savage. It is hand to hand. In the Jason Russell house, Jason Russell, is killed there. There's about 7 bodies, I think, in his front room of both American and British, mostly killed by bayonets. And they said the blood was essentially 1 to 2 inches thick inside that house. So incredibly savage fighting that removes everything earlier in the day had been, we're not sure. The ties of empire are strong. We all fought together. We celebrated in 1763. We loved George III. He was great. And now it's gone. Now it is just open. Even after North Bridge, there might have been a chance of a reconciliation, but now there is none. It is, Percy is lucky to get his command back into Charleston or Charlestown. He uses cannon essentially to clear the path to get his troops up Prospect Hill to Cambridge to Charlestown under the guns of the Royal Navy, and everyone, you've got the British hemmed up in Boston. You've got 14 to 20,000 militia who begin to encircle the city, and everyone goes, "What just happened?"
Wow. And how long did it take for
all day
the British to get back?
This is an all-day fight.
And in terms of casualties, what are we looking at on both sides?
You're looking for the British, you're looking at around 120, 130 dead, and several hundred wounded. On the American side, around 75, 76, estimates vary. Dead, with a good many wounded, and these wounded, by the way, are left all up and down the line of march. And you have British wounded who are being cared for by American doctors. Again, a lot of sense of uncertainty in what happens there, because this is not what anybody thought. Like, oh, we're all right. Well, this has happened. Now we're going to have independence. That's not it. It's literally just. I guess we're in a war. Yeah. What happens? So the Massachusetts Provincial Congress asked all the New England states, "Hey, can we have some help?" They send word to all the 13 colonies. I think Georgia gets word of it within 3 weeks, which is pretty good for the time.
Wow. That's great.
And then, of course, in the court of public opinion, you got to let Britain know. And the Americans get the first news of Lexington and Concord to England before Gage's dispatch does. They control the news story, which is critical in beginning to win the British people over towards the American cause, or just towards a war weariness of like, why are we fighting this? So it's a really critical thing.
Wow. Before we end, I just want to go into our Huzzah trivia portion here. So is there a piece of special trivia that you can share with us about the battles of Lexington and Concord?
Absolutely. So probably one of the oldest people who engage in this fight, if not, because there's a bunch. There's actually a squad of they're called the Old Men of Monotony. They're all 7 years war or even earlier war veterans who are too old to fight, and they seize a wagon and do other stuff. Anyway, but then there's Sam Whittemore, who is, I think, he's either 78 or 82. I can never remember exactly how old he is. He's a former British dragoon, and he did not. He's not sitting idly by. So he straps on 2 pistols, he gets his saber, he gets his musket, he walks out into his front yard. The British troops are opposing. He shoots one with his musket, he shoots 2 more with his pistols, draws a sword, and the British attack him. He gets shot through the face, he gets bayoneted about 13 times. They leave him for dead. He lives another decade.
No. Oh my gosh.
So
that is incredible.
Sam Whittemore, the oldest, craziest, get off my lawn individual of the Revolution. And there is a marker for him in modern day Arlington.
That's amazing. Great story and great insights today. So thanks so much for all this information about the battles of Lexington and Concord and the start of the American Revolution. And if anyone wants to learn more about the American Revolution or learn more about Army history in general, I encourage you to explore our website at history.army.mil. And don't forget about the series of pamphlets or monographs that we have, that you can access those from our website as well. And if you want to experience Army history every day, then visit our social media sites on Facebook, X, and Instagram. Thanks for joining us today on the United States Army History and Heritage Podcast. For the Center of Military History, I'm Lee Reynolds, and until next time, we're history.
The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or opinions of the U.S. Army or Department of Defense. For more information about the Army's proud history and heritage, go to history.army.mil.